Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this event from this different part of the world. My name is Michel André. I am a professor at the Technical University of Catalonia and the director of the Laboratory of Applied Bioacoustics. And on behalf of JPI Oceans and Laboratory of Applied Bioacoustics, I would like to extend our sincere gratitude to our partners who have joined forces to make this event possible today. We are speaking about the Ocean Noise Conference Series and IOC UNESCO in its leadership to the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. Your collaboration both have been invaluable in bringing this crucial topic to the forefront. Before we dive into the main content of today's event, let me give you a bit of context. Our laboratory is involved in this important work as part of a EU-funded project called Diaphonia, that stands for Assessing and Predicting the Impact of Underwater Noise on Marine Species. This project, along with 4 others, was funded under the JPI Ocean Framework that followed a call launched in 2022 under the lead of Italy and Germany to investigate the impacts of underwater noise on marine life. JPI Ocean, the European Joint Programming Initiative, is dedicated to enhance the efficiency and impact of research and innovation for healthy and productive seas and oceans. JPI Ocean's members are ministries and funding agencies that develop, fund, and implement national research agendas. In that capacity, JPI's Ocean's members recognize the importance of addressing noise as a significant source of marine pollution. These 5 funded projects are focusing on improving our understanding on the cumulative effect of anthropogenic noise on marine life, fostering synergies between academic, industrial, and political stakeholders, and contributing to the development of a robust regulatory framework. The concepts of today's discussion on mitigating underwater noise emerge from our application for a satellite event during the 2024 Ocean Decade Conference in Barcelona this year. We are delighted to host this webinar as a follow-up to that application and this furthering the dialogue on this critical issue. It's very important for us to point out that there is an overwhelming interest, and this is reflected by the high registration rates for this event. We are close to 500 participants that are slowly coming in, and this, of course, underscores the urgency and importance of addressing underwater noise pollution. And it's clear that by bringing together scientists and policymakers together today, we are taking a significant step towards bringing this topic to the forefront and advocating for effective regulations and a beneficial impact for a marine environment. We have attendees from all over the world, in the US, in other countries, in America, Asia, Africa, and of course from Europe. And this is very, very good to have all these representatives. And in terms of the background of the attendees, we have an equal share between academia, industry, NGO, policymakers, and also interest from people who are not directly involved in this issue. We will try during this event to address a series of topics, starting from this international regulation framework. We will try to address the different gaps that we understand are still present in between the different approaches that we will see with our panelists, how each country or continent deals with this issue of underwater noise. We look at the role of science, how science can really contribute to help to get these borders together and not to have them so far apart in the way to approach the issue of noise pollution. The importance of long-term data collection. This is something that is vital for policymakers, of course, to be relying on science. We will address the challenge to find species that are representative of this effect of noise We know that now we are dealing with many other species than we thought 20 or 30 years ago when we started to address this issue. We were concentrating on marine mammals, and now we know that we have fish, of course, but also marine vertebrates and plants that are affected by noise. So we need to find a way to not to forget any of these taxa when we speak about addressing this issue of underwater noise effect. Then we will also touch the aspect of the real-time, the fact that now we have the technology to bring real-time data to policymakers, and if we can think that this is something that in the future we can use, and hopefully in the near future, we know that times and timing are very different between the acquisition and the evidence of scientific data, and then when this is translated to policies, this takes a long time. And now we have access to this technology that allows us to directly address these needs to regulate. So can we really bridge this with this technology advances? The involvement of industry, this is key. We know that we can bring evidence in science. We need to have the industry together with us as much as the NGOs. So this is really an effort that we have to work together. And then we will end this discussion with where do we go now from this. After this, we will have a question and answer. So we received a lot of questions from you. We tried to cluster them. We couldn't list them all. So we have clustered them in 7 big groups, depending on how many of these questions would have been already answered during the panel discussion. We will enter in these topics, and then you are welcome to ask any question during this event. And then we will have Stefan and Yela bringing this to a panel. And now that I am, Stefan, I would like to thank you for your whole and dedicated work. Without you, this panel discussion would not have been real. Thank you very much. And now we are ready to jump, and I would like to introduce 5 panelists who come from all over the world. Some of them are still in the middle of the night, others in the early morning, in the middle of the afternoon. Each of them will address introductory remarks one by one. And we will start with Lila Hatch, who is a marine ecologist at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the US, and she's in charge of the Marine Sound program, and she will now address her introductory remarks. Thank you, Lila.
Thank you, Michel. Just going to share my screen. Hopefully this works. All right, so I have a few short remarks on aspects of our science and policy work on underwater noise that are showing a lot of growth, and places that we are still quite challenged. And this is just the beginning of our conversation. You'll already start to hear some themes with Michel's introductory remarks, and that'll help us, I think. I'll start with how we're advancing our common language for working with each other around the world, which starts from our ability to listen to the ocean and represent what we hear in ways that are comparable and are accessible to other people. And we are now listening over much larger areas, much longer time periods that are now more relevant to the scales of many of our effects on the ocean environment. And fundamentally, these have been very big data problems, and they track advances in cloud computing and artificial intelligence. They're bringing us new ways to store and provide this information. But fundamentally, what the endpoint is of that is no different than providing a translator or learning a common language. It's facilitating communication among people and growing our common understanding and our transparency. Our continuing challenge in this space, in my view, will be to continue to ensure that the endpoint of having common data practice does not exclude diverse sources of knowledge, but instead is ever more inclusive of how we represent what is known about underwater noise and why it's changing. Second, I think we are doing better at helping more people along the lines of what Michelle was talking about, understand that underwater noise is a sensory pollutant. For a very long time, it was considered a problem for a few whales responding to a few types of loud sounds. But as our materials for using sound to help people experience the underwater world are growing, more people are now understanding that this is about whole ecosystems and how diverse animals experience their environment and interact with one another. So sound has this amazing potential to reach beyond the limits of dim light and lack of oxygen and give people a sense of a world that we don't experience. And this helps us push beyond the scale of what we can see underwater in a photograph and really understand how much farther it is that animals experience the ocean environment. And this helps us understanding the scale at which we people are influencing it. And our challenge is going to be to continue to grow that tent of people who have a more holistic understanding of the importance of hearing underwater and the value of oceans. My last 2 points both focus on tightening the feedback loop. And what I mean by this is continuing to move away from waiting to surmount ever elusive burdens of scientific impact proof in order to begin developing mitigations, and towards this more partnership model in which science becomes an information service that supports our iterative evaluation of how effective or not a mitigation is, so we can continue to advance solutions at the same time as we study impacts. We're increasingly providing that type of service. We're also evaluating how noise is indirectly influenced by global shifts in our commerce, our climate, our environmental policy. Our challenge is going to be to continue to tighten that feedback loop, continue to acknowledge that we do need to take action in the face of uncertainty, but that we can prioritize what the most important uncertainties are and train our collective solution building and global information exchange on those priorities. Lastly, I think it's particularly true in how we show up to inform sustainable technology development. We're doing better in our work with technology developers. We're getting better at informing more specific questions, especially for purposeful sources of noise that we use. We're explaining what the most important trade-offs are for advancing sources that have a reduced environmental footprint. And for sources of noise underwater that are byproducts, like vessels, we have spaces like the experience building phase at the United Nations International Maritime Organization to share what is working, what doesn't, to integrate noise reduction within larger portfolios of how we build and operate more sustainable vessels. We're going to need to continue to emphasize low noise output in sustainable technology innovations and find ways to incentivize them. Our challenge as we continue to work to change how people do business offshore is to work equally hard to identify and protect more ecologically important marine areas and work to include quiet in the function of these places. Quiet needs to continue to have a place in our work to ensure that animals have refugia so they can be as resilient as possible in a changing ocean.
Thank you, Lila. We can see, I mean, the big challenge that we have. I was thinking when I was reading your slide and listening to what you were saying, when we think of these past years and these 20 years ago and 30 years ago, when we were already facing a complex situation, just dealing with a few species and not even knowing the impact of many sound sources. We're just starting. And now we are expanding this knowledge to so many species and bringing this to an ecosystem level. And also we have lots of new sounds of sources sources of sound, and this has bring this complexity to a level that we couldn't think of these past years. So this is really a challenge, and to address the way we can think of a solution is how we can coexist, how we can cohabitate with the reality that we need to protect the ocean from our activities, knowing that we don't want to stop them because we need them, but we need to cohabitate and coexist. And this is the topic that our next panelist will address. Tomonori Akamatsu is a professor at the Faculty of Science and Engineering at the Waseda University in Japan. Tom, thank you very much.
Thank you, Michelle. And yeah, I really enjoying this discussion of today. And let me introduce something concept of the Japanese village. Okay. So can you see my screen? Okay. So, the sound is now a new pollutant in the ocean, but also the essential variable in the ocean as well. So sound is something, a mixture of a lot of information, but also some kind of the pollutant as well. So positive and negative side is coexisting each other. And for example, this is the first top left figure is showing the conflict of frequency range. Many of the marine creatures, including baleen whale and also the fish, they are quite sensitive in a low frequency range. Low frequency means like less than approximately 1 kilohertz. So they are sensitive in low frequency range, but very much unfortunately, the anthropogenic noise, generated by the shipping and pile driving and dredging and offshore wind farm, blah, 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 also produce a low frequency. So, the noise frequency range is also be used by the ocean creatures simultaneously in the same time, in the same place. So in that sense, we cannot separate to noise and communication clearly. In the same time, same location. Some creatures use the sound for the communication, but also exactly same time, the noise covering about that. So, completely separate or completely get rid of the noise is nearly impossible or not in practice. So what I'm wish to introduce is the kind of Satoyama concept in the Japanese village. The Satoyama is the people have found ways to meet their own needs while existing with and even supporting native species. And it is not easy to understand by just reading that. But if you're looking at the right side pictures, you can see a forest, but also a rice field and houses and stream, but the stream is not a natural one, but the farmers introduce water to the rice field. So the local village people use the water resources, use the land, and the cut of some of the trees and using that as a fuel in ancient time. But it is really sustainable because of the rice field on growing up the small insect and contributing for the better biodiversity. And also cutting a tree, let the light the airs into the forest. So human activities even encourage the biodiversity in the local area. So this is something that a good example of the coexisting with the natural status of the forest with the human activities and human living. So what I wish to say is not only for the frequency range, but also the underwater soundscape is highly variable. As you see there, soundscape is changing in the season by season. And that means not only for the spatial, but also temporal separation is efficient with for the adaptive management. Now, this area, we shouldn't touch it. This area, we can develop it. This yes or no separation probably doesn't work, especially in the coastal water. So not only for the location, but also time and to see when and where, okay, we can touch it. and when and where we shouldn't touch it. So this kind of the fine tuning of the management work is quite important. It's just like a Satoyama effort by the village people in the Japanese local area. So what we wish to seek for is something Sato Umi. Sato Umi, the village ocean or village sea. And the people use the windmill farm offshore, but not only to use and develop of the electric energy, but also use that kind of platform as even contributing for the underwater biodiversity. I will say the offshore windmill farm, it's kind of the iron forest. It's completely, the artificial one. But iron forest also can accommodate some new species, the new fauna in the underwater. So how we can better monitor and how we can manage better them, what we hope is coexistence with the energy development, with the biodiversity conservation of that area. So this is just what I say, I will hope, but how we can do it is the issue I think we can discuss later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Very interesting to bring this aspect of the effect of what happens on land as a direct effect, of course, on the marine environment, and is adding the complexity, but also the need to not to forget that whatever we decide to do or we are able to do in the ocean will have a consequence on land, and vice versa. And this also, I mean, we are speaking about coastal waters, but if we are addressing deep seas, there is another bunch of challenges that affect us there, and we need data. We have been investing a lot of effort in the last years in having data on coastal waters. This is maybe the most urgent, because, and also maybe the easiest, because we are close by. But the ICs have a very important role in the balance of the ocean, and for that we need, of course, data and long-term data, which is the topic that Anna Shirovic, who is a professor at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Norway, will address for us now. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Michel. It's a pleasure to be here today. And everybody can see my screen, yeah? So what I want to highlight today is the importance of long-term acoustic monitoring for improving our understanding of underwater acoustic environment, and how it can help provide information that is critical to policy. There are really a number of reasons why long-term acoustic monitoring is critical when we're talking about and discussing impacts of noise. One is that it provides really the basis to help us understand long-term trends and patterns in a changing world. It has the benefit and advantage that it can provide information both on the animal and biota, but also the anthropogenic activities. And some of the places where I think it can particularly contribute is providing real information, actual monitoring of whether the rules and activities that in many regulatory frameworks, the operators that are conducting these activities just get to enter information somewhere on how and what they will be doing. Very often there isn't necessarily any kind of check on that and verification that the sound levels that were monitored beforehand are the ones that are occurring in the environment, or that the durations of activities are what they're supposed to be, and so on and so forth. And for me personally, one of the moments when this kind of discrepancy that sometimes occurs became apparent is I've done a lot of monitoring in Southern California on the Navy ranges. And we were doing this for the Navy, and part of our reporting to them was also reporting on all of the sonar activity that was happening. And we were finding that there was sonar activity basically all the time, other than like 2 weeks around Christmas. But the Navy's kind of internal reporting was just on these exercises, during which there would be maybe a couple of days or a couple of weeks when there was really intense activity. the regular other parts of it, they were not even accounting for. So if you were a scientist going into that environment thinking, oh, well, there wasn't really an exercise right now, you might think, oh, there is no sonar there. You wouldn't have necessarily a wholesale picture of what kind of acoustic environment and an exposure the animals in that habitat have. If you're just going based on kind of the perception of the Navy of what they were doing in terms of sound input. Also, what we have done with monitoring for other signals is founding new sound sources and identifying emerging concerns, basically, something that wasn't even on anybody's radar. And I have a couple of examples here. On the top panel, what I'm showing you here, this was a documentation of extent of use of underwater explosions, or the seal bombs, in Southern California. And you can see this map, Los Angeles, marked here for your reference. But all of these circles denote acoustic monitoring sites, and they're kind of split in half, where the left side shows the frequency and abundance of these explosions, and the right side shows the amount of squid landings, because that's what we ultimately figured out that these seal bombs are being used to was during squid fisheries. And you can see that in some areas of Southern California Bight, there's quite extensive use of these explosions, where overnight you can have hundreds of explosions happening, which was something that the regulatory agency wasn't aware of and nobody really paid attention to before we started recording, doing something totally different. A similar story, in a way, is the discovery of the use of ultrasonic anti-fouling devices on vessels. This is basically tourist vessels that were going to the island of Guadalupe down off of Mexico. And they were using these, or they are using these ultrasonic over 20 kilohertz pingers to prevent buildup of organisms on their hulls. And these products are actually being advertised as being super safe and just great way, non-toxic, to prevent your boat from reducing drag. However, these pingers are right in the frequency of various higher frequency marine mammals. And what they found at Guadalupe, in the top panel here, is showing you the occurrence of this ultrasonic anti-fouling. It's very seasonal when the vessels that are going down for fishing and finding sharks are there. And during that same time, on the bottom panel, you see a decrease in the presence of Cuvier's beaked whales. They seem to not like these ultrasonic anti-fouling devices. So again, this was something that was not anybody's radar, and it took a little while to figure out what is actually this weird new signal, even to us who have been doing underwater recording for a really long time. So it's also important to maintain listening to the ocean, because things change all the time and we don't necessarily know what is going on unless we are listening. With that, I would like to add that I think that we're in a really good place, and I think there's a lot of hope in ways that we can move forward with these analyses. For example, as Leila mentioned, there's more and better tools, both in terms of hardware, software, data sharing, that we're all contributing to. I have felt that over my career, there's certainly been a big shift in how much scientists are engaged with policy and managers. This is a critical thing that when I was starting as a PhD student, is something that I would say was kind of frowned upon, to do this applied research where you are actively engaging with the other side. But that's definitely not the case anymore. I think we've all realized how important it is that we are talking together in situations like this roundtable, for example. And then lastly, I also seen a shift in the interests of young generation of scientists, students that come to me now that want to do some kind of acoustic research. They are all very much interested in noise and problems of noise pollution and the impact of noise. That was not really anybody's radar 15, even 10 years ago, but there's been very much an increase in this awareness. So these are the kinds of things that I'm excited to discuss and talk more about with everybody. I'll stop sharing. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Anna. Yes, the complexity is high. The knowledge is also better. The technology is also here. And from what we are now being able to hear, we are seeing that we discover new sound sources. We discover every day more species that might or are affected by noise. So now we have had to change and switch from what we're doing in the past, looking at the sensitivity of a particular species to try to find some threshold and say, okay, we're gonna go over this threshold because we're gonna affect this particular species. But the number of species has increased dramatically in the last years. We are now even thinking of, I mean, we need to consider plants. Invertebrates were 10 years ago. Now the plants we just discovered that the aquatic plants are suffering from noise exposure. So this brings us to a different approach. We have to change. We had to change, and still need to change totally our approach to make our data efficient for the policy makers. And this is the topic in the remarks that Dr. Peter Sigre will address. Peter is a senior researcher at the Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden, and is going to talk to us about the ecosystem approach from a European perspective. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Michel.
Can you put your presentation in the presentation mode, please? Thanks.
I will try. Is that better? Yes. So thank you very much, Michel, and I'm very happy to be invited to this event, very important and a very large audience also, which I understand comes from the whole of the world. Being invited, I was thinking more than twice what to talk about, and I came to the decision finally that maybe it's best I talk a little bit about the European perspective. And the reason is that we have been working with the management of the European coast for a very long time now, and made some progress, I would say, and also identified gaps and recognized large challenges when it comes to doing a kind of a full ecosystem management in the end. I will try really to avoid the language we use in Europe, but it is a risk-based approach we are doing, and we are trying to assess what is the effect on the ecosystem level. And the whole concept, or it is a framework. As a framework, it is important to understand that the framework acts as a fence. It just shows where you can, what you should do. You should be inside the fence, but you can do whatever you want inside the fence, but don't walk over the fence. And that is the framework. So it is in principle a system or a framework that allows for a very high regional adaptation in this case. And that we need to have, not just in Europe, but in the whole world. It's very important. In Europe, we have the Baltic Sea in the north, and we have the Mediterranean and the Black Sea in the south. It's very, very different approaches needed there. But in principle, what we have done is that we have come to an agreement what is an acceptable status, and we call it good environmental status in Europe. But what is an acceptable status? And that is in principle where we are at the moment in Europe, that countries, they have to report if they have acceptable status in their waters or not. But that's not enough when it comes to a management framework. If we don't have acceptable status, the framework has also to describe how to deal with that situation. And in the case of the European way, is targets has to be set. And immediately when you start to set targets, you start to walk into waters that are a little bit different than we are just talking about environmental status. There are social, economical issues coming up. How do we change, for example, shipping, which is not just something for a member state to do. And all these things has to really be thought about carefully, and also there has to be an pragmatic way of implementing in the end. But you see the loop on the left side there, that target setting will lead to new monitoring that will tell you if the accepted, if the status has improved or not, and then you take measures, and hopefully in the end, when you rotate around this loop, the ecosystem will become, the status of ecosystem will be better. Of course, the devil is in the details, so I will not go into it in a great detail, how it works. But the way we have done is that we realize that there are challenges, there are gaps, and it is very difficult, of course, to assess the status of an ecosystem. So what we say is that it should instead be we should look at the significant effects on population level for species, and then we even make it easier and say that we choose an indicator species in this case that somehow represents the whole ecosystem. And then this species live in a habitat. And I also would like to underline that the health or the status of the ecosystem is not measured in sound pressure. That sound pressure is a physical metric, and it's very often there are these discussions coming up that how do we improve it by lowering the noise levels. It's not directly the noise levels which we have to lower. What we have to do is to increase the status of the habitat where the species are living, or improve the health. So in Europe, we are measuring it in available habitat, or how much loss have we in the habitat of the indicator species. And habitat is an area, so actually the threshold value in Europe is area, percentage of area. And I think that's an important distinguishing, one has to distinguish that from sound pressure. And I'm quite sure, and I hope that we will be able to discuss, is there any other way to measure, to do a metric on ecosystem? Maybe there are other ways, but in Europe we have come to percentage of habitat. And of course, there are other stuff here also, but I think that's enough for the time being. So I give the word to Michel, sorry.
Peter, thank you very much. This is very interesting because, I mean, I have the, not the only sensation, but we are increasing the complexity. We spoke about the different species that now are affected by noise, the different sound sources that have this effect on these species. And now we are speaking about the different approaches that each continent or country has when we have to deal with this. And the EU approach is this choice that we made here. I can recall that at the start was in 2008. We thought that the first imperative aspect was to be able to have an agreement on how to measure. So we were looking at the metrics that we could agree on to measure the effect of noise being from human activities. And we thought that it was the very important first step, and then we would deal with the effect. So we spent this very effort to define the different indicators of what you were seeing, the good environmental status of the ocean, starting with this specific data. And now we are dealing with how do we do with this, with all these species we have to deal with, and the habitat. And I think this is very important, what you just said about the way that we need to deal in terms of the degradation of the habitat, and how we can regenerate it or bring some data to at least try to find a balance, and what Tom was speaking of, the coexistence of our activity with the conservation of the ocean. Our last panelist has a broad view on all these topics. She comes from Germany and lives in Australia for many years. She's been involved in many of the international panels, and so she's a unique voice to address the last introductory remarks. She's Christine Earps. She's a professor at the Curtin University in Perth, Australia, and the director of the Center for Marine Science and Technology. Thank you, Christine.
Oh, thank you, Michel. Okay, so I thought I was going to take a look at whether or not we are making progress, but I think the previous speakers have actually all nicely demonstrated how we are making progress on the science front, on the policy front, etc. So here's my pitch about this. So having worked with 80 other authors for the last 10 years on 3 books, and that is not one book every 3 years, but 3 books in parallel where each took 10 years, I truly feel like we're making huge progress. So it has not taken us 10 years because we were slow to progress with the summaries and the writing, but rather because of the amount of progress and speed at which we as a community are progressing. And so about every 6 months, at least one of the chapter teams felt like they now really needed to update their chapter, and then you run around in circles. And after 10 years, you say, that's it now, nobody's going to update anything anymore. But what I'm trying to say here, this is good news. So having had the luxury of going through that process of summarizing the information out there on underwater noise and animal bioacoustics and how noise affects animals, it really made me appreciate it, feel like we are doing really well as a community. So then in my second plot there, you can see graphs that I pulled out from Scopus, and anybody can do that. So it looks at the research outputs by subject topic, and it's an exponential increase. And if you do this in Scopus, you can click anywhere along those graphs and it will come up with a list of the articles that actually went into each of those data points. So then when you look through those articles, you get impressed by the quality of the studies and reports that we're putting out there. Some of the outputs are in the grey literature, but honestly, this can be much more rigorously reviewed than some of the journal publications. You'll also see that studies range from shoestring budget, opportunistic and observational to multi-million-dollar and multi-year sort of controlled studies, but they all contribute valuable information. So in these 3 books, we tried to pull together data summaries, for example, for behavioral responses of animals to noise. And others have tried that too, like the team around Brandon Southall. It's a massive, massive effort. And that is because of the ever-increasing amount of data. And it's not just data we are collecting, but also data that we're sharing. So often at workshops in the last, 10 years, we said, oh, we need to get better at data sharing. And we are. And there's a tool, Mendeley Data, where you can actually track this. So again, there's an exponential increase in the data sets that are being publicly made available, but also in the software that we are sharing publicly for analysis. And then finally on Scopus, you can also track the sources of funding and the amounts of money. So a huge amount of research is funded by industry, but also by defense and by regulators. And often in workshops comes the concern that there might be a conflict of interest. Are the results colored by the funder? So I don't think so. And in fact, many programs have been jointly funded by multiple stakeholders. But what I think there is a bias in the types of noises, the types of species, and maybe the geographic regions that have been studied. So then if you look at my 5th point there about science transfer to policy, this can be a slow process, right? So it can take years for countries to come up or to develop and review and then change their legal or their government policies. But science uptake does not have to wait for that. So for example, in Australia, under our regulations, industry or anybody wanting to develop something in the ocean needs to demonstrate to the regulator that they understand the environment and the species and the noises that they will likely make. And that often requires some research right there and then. They need to demonstrate that they understand the impacts and the risks. They then need to have a plan to mitigate to as low as reasonably practical. And they also need to come up with an environmental plan that has key performance indicators that require monitoring the environment to see whether they actually achieve what they thought they could mitigate to. So, and also, at least in Australia, stakeholder engagement is required. There's a public comment period on these environmental plans that industry or others put forward. So there are several points in the process where the newest and hottest science can actually inform the environmental plan. You don't have to wait for policy to change. So then in my sixth little pitch there, noise travels fast and far, and therefore is a transboundary problem that often is raised as an issue. You know, it's their problem, their fault, not ours. And every country has different legislations and regulations, and even the noise thresholds that are applied in different jurisdictions differ. But that's not bad, right? So there are more and more international agreements. We now have the High Seas Treaty. There's the International Seabed Authority looking at subsea mining noise. There's the Antarctic Treaty. And then, of course, in Europe, we've got the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. So there are lots of international efforts to make this a shared problem and a shared solution. And in addition, for example, in the US and Australia, as citizens or companies from those countries operating in international waters, you have to comply with your home country's regulations as well. So in a sense, then, you know, if there's more than one that apply, the most stringent in the end gets applied. So it gets twice as good in a sense. So finally, then, something that I think sort of want to echo from Anna, in terms of monitoring, yes, it's important. And there's always new technology coming up or repurposed technology. So the slide or the little image I've got there is showing subsea telecommunications cables. So there's existing infrastructure. There's several teams working on dual purposing these existing telecommunications, fiber optic cables for distributed acoustic sensing. And they have huge potential for us to monitor not only national waters, but really get into deep and far and often more inaccessible waters. All right, so that was my pitch.
Christine, thank you very much, and apologize to mispronounce your name. I have a colleague in our laboratory who named Herbs. So no,
really
you're Herbie, of course, Christine Herbie, and sorry about that. Thank you very much for your comments and your slides. This brings us directly to the first point, to the topic of the panel discussion that we are starting with, is addressing your 6th point in your slide, which is this international regulation. We have seen and heard all these different approaches from different countries. As you said, this is good, but at the same time, does this introduce a more complex approach when we want to operate in different areas? How we compare data, and how do we bridge this gap between these international scientific research and the implementation of cohesive policies. So I would like to address this first point to the panel, and maybe have Lila being the first to answer with your experience in the US, and then maybe Peter to join this discussion. Thank you.
I think the most important shift that we've been working on in the United States is to at least recognize that when systems are built around impact findings to particular species for each noisy event, right? When we look at impacts and build regulatory authority around a noisy event at a time to one species at a time, that we miss a lot of what is needed in order to protect marine ecosystems. And so on the one hand, we have built in the United States and really enjoyed international collaboration around how it is that we make findings of direct physical injury to animals' ears from particular source types. That information sharing is critical and is part of the fabric. Unfortunately, it does not fully address particularly chronic and cumulative effects to ecosystems. And that fabric has been really important to see grow bluntly in Europe. We have been watching that in the United States and trying to figure out how to make shifts that better account for the accumulated effect of loud sources across larger scales, as well as the more chronic effect of sources that are more pervasive and at lower levels in the marine ecosystem. I think there, I'd like to say that that also includes needing to shift from an impact-driven paradigm to a source control pollution paradigm. You have to get to a place where instead of it being my agency, NOAA, which is a natural resource authority, making determinations of impacts that drive regulations. You need to also start to embed source control in those that regulate directly the sources of sound. So that needs to be other agencies and other folks who are working hard in the United States in that space to get into dialogues directly with industry about what the feasibility is of altering purposeful source types, as well as controlling noise from those incidental byproduct noise sources we have from building things in the ocean and moving vessels. The very last thing I'll say, because I just think it'll be fun to talk about with this panel, is indicators finding for pollution control. We have a large sort of fabric to work from in how you choose an indicator to drive pollution control. And obviously humans are the biggest indicator species used in that fabric. We are the drivers often of how much is too much pollution of various different types in various different spaces. And this is already true for things like transportation noise, how much noise we are tolerating from an airplane. All of that fabrication for another transportation source like aircraft or trucks or cars, that is driven by human perception, right? And we have had to do that because we are a ubiquitous species on this planet, and we are the drivers of changing our own behavior and how we make things. So we need to start to think about that fabric underwater, right? And be a little bit more tolerant of, yes, we changed how we fabricate aircraft because we recognize that we're not going to change how an aircraft is built when it goes from Germany to the United States to Tokyo. It needs to have some pervasive things that are different about it from its design, and it needs to operate unilaterally, regardless of whether it encounters people here or people there or people the other place. There, that's a one species model. However, that is also affecting the birds of around Heathrow and the birds around Germany and the birds around, right? We are now going in and out of different animal habitats with different sensitivities, but we have to make some more unilateral changes in how we do design, and then we can be more facile, and we can change what is acceptable in places that animals need different shifts. If we need to be even quieter, we can make changes in routing and speed and overflight distance. These are things that we already do for other transportation sources. So I'm picking on transportation sources because we all know that that is one of the spaces that our regulatory fabric needs to be built. And I just wanted to note that we are not building that fabric for vessels and shipping against a completely deposit background. We have other models for transportation that we can build on.
Thank you, Lila. I think you raised a very important point here. And before I ask Peter to comment, Peter during his presentation spoke about, he said, maybe we addressed the difficulty of choosing these indicator species. And you just pointed out, Lila, now, because the different cases, different scenarios, but also sharing the same issue. And I was wondering if, of course, we know the importance of science, the global approach of science that could help to bridge the gaps between the different approaches from the different countries in terms of the regulation of noise. But could we think of a general approach which will be based on the fact that bioacoustics could be a proxy to the biological activity, and where we could set a sort of trend in an area, in an habitat, where all the different species are contributed to this trend, and then looking at changes in this trend as an evidence of an effect of an activity, and that way we wouldn't have to identify the different species, but we will take the bioacoustic activity again as a proxy of the biological activity, and then be able to regulate at the larger scale and maybe across the different borders. Peter, what is your comment on this?
Thank you, Michel. I think that Tom has a hand up. I don't know if, should we let Tom, maybe he has some kind of comment on Lila's.
Yeah, Peter first.
Okay, Peter first. Thank you. Okay, Tom, thank you. Well, I'm looking at listening to this and aligning global frameworks. It's a very, very interesting question, and I think it's a very big challenge in many ways. It is important, and I would say we are not doing that at the moment, but we have to. I mean, start some kind of aligning in some way, and I think I'm very eager to hear the other panelists to join in here. And as I pointed out in my presentation, is that we have to think of a framework as some kind of fence, and then all the different regions in the world in a future alignment can do their own way, develop their own framework inside it somehow. And that is very, very important. I'm also thinking about, you mentioned that, Michel, that in the more southern regions, not Europe, but in southern regions, we have biophony, which is very important. We have the diurnal choruses and things like that. And that could be a proxy how that changes, for example. And that we don't have at all in Europe, that kind, because it's a silent sea we have in Europe here. And so there are so what I a little bit looking foresee is that the different frameworks will go very different way, but we need aligning them in the future in some way. And I think this is partly why I'm participating here, to raise this question, how is that going to be done? And it was also mentioned here that the High Sea Treaty is one way, but I think the High Seas Treaties is very good, but it is, and also when I read it, I see a lot of the words that we use here among us in this panel are the same as in the High Seas Treaties, which is very good. Measures, targets, ecosystem, biodiversity, and these things. They are common, and information sharing is one of them. But I think we need more than information sharing in them. We need something that actually tries to align the global frameworks in the future. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Peter. Tom?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Lyle and Peter. And a very interesting point. And from the regulatory side, I think the regulatory side needed to know what the noise is really affected or not. That is most important critical point to whether we need to regulate or we do not need to regulate. I wish to point out the difference of as a pollutant of the sound. The sound is actually pollutant, but if the source shut down, the sound is immediately gone. So it's completely different from the carbon dioxide or NOx. So these kind of chemical substance, it's accumulated. So anywhere on the globe, it's exposed, it's accumulated on the globe. So to reduce the total amount of that chemical substance, that's efficient. But for the case of the sound, it's more like time dependent and location dependent, and source is I think it's much more easy to be controlled comparing with the carbon dioxide or like NOx. So if I were the government person to regulate it, okay, not necessarily to reduce all of the global ocean noise. Okay, this point is very much important because of a lot of important endangered species there, and also very much high noise exposure there. So, okay, this should be regulated. But if the other area, there's a lot of noise there, but it's nearly no rare species existed or maybe already gone. So depending on the something like biodiversity map, or depending on the importance, ecological importance area, like using EBSA, and to compare with the noise exposure level, then we can compare that, okay, this is important. This is not relatively important. So this is kind of fine-tuning of the spatial and time-dependent regulation. Maybe I think the solution of the future. My opinion. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. Christine, you have raised your hand, and then I'll ask a question to Anna. Thank you.
Okay, cool. So also, I mean, do we need a global framework to tackle this? We have all these countries doing their own thing. Is that a problem? I think we're on the right track. I don't think we necessarily need one global framework, because I think at the moment, we're managing things transboundary with multiple jurisdictions, depending on where there is the greatest need. So for example, under the Antarctic Treaty, so any country wanting to do something in Antarctica, they will do their own environmental impact assessment. If it looks like minor, then they probably just go ahead. If it looks like it's going to have a greater impact, then it gets sent to all parties for review and comment, and it's going to be discussed. So at that stage, you're pulling together all of the expertise that is out there, and you're trying to build something overarching all of the different countries' individual approaches. And I think it's for a greater outcome. And this is now specific to one geographic region, but you're looking at different types of stressors, so not just noise, but also chemicals or whatever. So anything that could impact that whole ecosystem gets dealt with, but it's focused on the region. But then if you look at the International Seabed Authority, where they are currently trying to come up with noise regulations for subsea mining, it's obviously just for one type of operation, but then over a very large area and multiple oceans. So I'm thinking we're heading in the right direction. We're looking where are the biggest issues, and they can be in biodiversity or in geography or in certain activities. But we're tackling that, and we're doing that not alone, but I think together, taking the best of multiple legislations and information that we just have available.
Thank you, Christine. I was going to ask a question to Anna, but she raised her hand, so I wait for her to comment. Maybe she already addressing what I was asking for. Anna?
Well, yeah, I was debating, do I put my hand up or not, but we can do the question next. But I think to actually follow up on what Christine said, I think there's two issues in my mind. One is what is kind of our biggest concern and things that we really need to be worried about. But then also we shouldn't forget other noise sources that are constant, kind of chronic, maybe lower level contributors. And as an example, I would take maybe the development of offshore wind farms, where initially there was a lot of effort and work around the development phase, the construction and the building and the noise that's produced by that, and less of a concern with what happens with operational noise, because it wasn't as high level and assumed not to be high impact. But in fact, I don't think that we can work with those kinds of assumptions, because our seas are becoming more and more industrialized. And even if we have low levels of chronic noise industrially in different places, as it accumulates over time and over space and over different sources, I think that all becomes a concern. And moving to the state where we are thinking about noise, not just from these high impact sources, but just all the noise that is there at different times is an important bit of the whole puzzle as well.
Absolutely. And also we can add the effect of noise that is produced on land in coastal waters, that is also introduced in water. And it's something that we have not yet addressed fully. So this is a reality. And I will like to address this question to the panel. Do you think that these different fragmented scientific data that we all see around the world is going the right direction in terms of the policy makers? Are we going good in terms of the research that is done? Are we providing the right data so they can effectively address this issue at the policy level?
Can I start with that?
Please.
Since I'm here already. I was actually also wanting to address that in terms of, I think from the science side, I feel like we're doing pretty good in terms of data sharing and data collection. There is a lot of, I think, directional focus on where there are funding sources for particular types of noise sources, but in general, I'm not too concerned about any fragmentation or anything like that in the answer, because there's still so much that we don't know, and there's still so many things that we're trying to figure out, and I see just lots of contributions that are helping get us there eventually. So I feel like we're still at an early stage where there is just so much to do, that as people are contributing and working together, that it helps build the whole picture.
Thank you, Anna, Lila. And Peter afterwards.
Christine talked about platforms for sharing. I think they are getting stronger. I would say that in working really globally and starting to emphasize the places in the world where biodiversity issues are really strong and really supporting implementation of mitigations in those areas, that we need to keep at it, rather than the sort of daunting "we need to keep at it" that I would have said a decade ago. I think we really now have the mechanisms to do it. We all know, I think, also that scientific data shoved into an increasingly large database is actually not policy friendly, right? That interpretation phase that collects information and provides it to people in ways that is more decision ready is really an important phase. And again, I think we have a lot of investment in sort of risk assessment frameworks around the world now. So I am a little bit less concerned with getting raw data to people, although that is good. I am more concerned with having interpretation frameworks not being rebuilt by people in duplicative fashion all over the world, one after another, but instead having frameworks that are facile, able to be used by a lot of different people, be more accessible to them.
Thank you, Lila. Peter, you want to comment?
Yes, thank you. I think science is doing well to start with, but I have a wish list. I have a wish list from European perspective again, and that is I would like to see more studies on population effects. We are doing single species, very much single species science today, and to be able to do ecosystem impact on the ecosystem, we need to know the bigger picture. What is the noise affecting in the bigger picture than on a single species, on a whale or something like that. And also Laila, in her presentation in the beginning, she was mentioning, if I remember, humans and airplanes that they are polluting. And in that case, there is no discussion. It's a dose response they're looking at, dose response. And we have very little dose response when it comes to species. There's some, but not enough. So if I put up on my list and population effects and more dose response studies would be very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. We are speaking of a cumulative effect of a population effect and those response. Christine, from your experience, and you were saying, and I think we all agree that we have data and we are going the right direction. How could we speed up the process of translating scientific results into the policy making decision? Can we use technology for that? Are we ready to use technology to speed up the process? Is it something that we need to do?
Okay, 2 comments on that one. I like what Leila said, because I didn't think about that. So I mean, the data is out there, but there's a step required maybe to make it accessible and pre-process it. So I quite like that. So I want to reiterate that one. But I think, as I was trying to say, in the whole process where something gets permitted and gets reviewed or so, you don't just need to rely on your latest policy, because at the moment that people can comment or that stakeholders get involved, anybody can come up, oh, you know, you didn't look at this study and there's additional data and I heard this. So I think it is an interactive and therefore very current and immediate approach where the most recent science and knowledge can flow into the mitigation management, monitoring, conservation management process. I don't think you have to wait for policy to change.
Yes, thank you. This maybe brings me to the fact that we are seeing that some marine protected areas, they have their own way to regulate their activity there. And some of them are starting to ask ships to present some noise levels before they can cross it, and some of them cannot do that, and they have to go around it. Of course, this increases the time, increases the consumption of fuel, and without having maybe to push on the policy, this is on a natural, say, way that to save energy and time, they would probably address this issue faster than being forced or punished by the law by doing this. So this is converging with this also economical interest that this industry had this add to the picture, and probably this leads us to the role of this effort, the joint effort that we're speaking, these activities, industries that need to be more and more involved in the decision making. And also, you were saying, Christine, that there are lots of funding effort provided by industry, and this is good. How can we see a better involvement of industries in this effort to address this noise issue? Yes, Anna, Tom.
My hand was actually to follow on what Christine was saying earlier in your previous question, which is how do we facilitate this process and whether it's something technological. But I think that one way that we can really try to move the process of getting our science to policymakers and managers is by interacting with each other earlier and sooner and throughout the process, and kind of building that communication and interaction into the whole project. And I think to have a shout out to JPI Oceans that's been funding some of the research that is along the lines of looking at impacts and effects. They're like within that scope, we are trying to see how do we convert our knowledge into policy useful things. And that's something that we as scientists certainly need training on, because we don't spend our time thinking about policy until we have somebody tell us these are the kinds of information, these are the kinds of things that we see. So like, as Peter said, dose response, population level impacts, and then we can start kind of directing ourselves in that direction. So I think having these kinds of interactions across disciplines and across boundaries are really, really important to making progress.
Tom?
Can I say something? Yeah, I mostly echo Laila's opinion. The interpreters or interpretation from the data to the policy making is quite important. And that's kind of the bridging the gap. That is most important, but relatively less people specialize with that. So interpretation is needed. The policymakers, regulators have already some issues needed to solve it, but they don't know how to solve it. So, but the scientist is too much concentrate the data and to write a paper. To bridging from that scientific data to solve that of the social issue, that is more like a kind of think tank role rather than like a scientist role. But that kind of the function should be accommodated by the government, or maybe some kind of JIP or some kind of the industrial alliance. So I think that is encouraging regulators kind of the motivations. And the next question that Michelle Rose is the how do some incentive for the economical side, industrial side, and basically money, But the noise issue cannot be interpreted or converted to the money yet. So it's something unlike the carbon dioxide, the carbon credit. We still don't have any noise credit yet. The need to convert the noise issue to some kind of the social value, maybe needed to involve like financial sectors, like insurance sectors, and that may be one of the kind of point to involve the industrial side. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Maybe we need to move a little bit to other topics, although each of them that we are addressing now could be sufficient to take time to comment on them. I would like to address something that we have not yet spoken of. Is we are speaking about tracking the different science and tracking the data and the results that we have. Is there a need to track the policy monitoring? The policy effectiveness. Is this something that we could think of? Is to trace and to monitor and to address not only in science but what the policies are evolving a long time, or to make sure that the policy are aligned with the data, with the scientific data. Who wants to take some comments on this question? Lila?
Yeah, I think this is critical. I think what I brought up in my opening comments actually is that feedback loop, that I hope we get actually away from a sort of science does its thing over here, we amass a gigantic pile of data, it reaches a tipping point, we take action, right? This is too slow and also not adaptive, right? We all know it should be a circle, like in Peter's picture. So what we are doing now, and if you evaluate effectiveness, then you have the ability to adapt to the solution, and you can do this iteratively, and you can do it more quickly. I think we should get real tangible about when that works and what breaks down the circle. There are some great experiences recently in Germany for how do we incentivize folks getting in the water with alternative bubble curtain designs and actually testing them before we regulate on them. And if we really want to drive towards this target, how do we get out of the way of making sure that some of those solutions can be developed? It gets to Tom's point of how do we incentivize people being at the table? If we've created barriers to entry for people to test and evaluate what can be quieter source, but needs to be proven, needs to be examined more, we need to remove those barriers to entry, right? We need to de-risk the solution space. We need to create a space where a lot of these alternatives can come into the fore. And then the last part of incentives, which I think is not quite captured by the word incentives, is that ultimately we are after a more holistic, sustainable use of technology offshore. We want it to be quieter, but we want it to work, period. We want it to be lower greenhouse gas. We want it to use less fuel, right? These are all things. So the example you were talking about, Michelle, where we wind up with a solution, that is a solution that's not a solution yet, right? We need to get to a place where we have evaluated and moved forward with things that have a greater environmental benefit across several different stovepipes. And if we stay in our noise stovepipe, we are not going to wind up with an optimized solution. We need to be at the table where technology is being developed to, yes, get what it needs to get done. But when it has a green label, a more sustainable label, we want that label to have been evaluated across litter, fouling, right? We want it to be lower noise, and we want it to be lower use of fuel and release of carbon. So those are things that we need to be thinking about to bring these solutions into what they actually need to be long term.
Thank you, Lila. Peter, I think you wanted to react on the this policy effectiveness tracking.
Yes. Well, Lila mentioned principle what I would like to say, but I can add in that the time is an issue that we have to think a little bit more about. That everything takes such a long time. I mean that, I mean the forecast around the world is that the sound will double every 10 years. We have 3 dB increase on average globally on underwater noise. That's the forecast. It's varying the region for region. That implies that if we start working now on mitigation effects and stakeholders and involving them, maybe we can achieve 3 dB in 10 years, but that means it will be eaten up by the 3 dBs that increase. So time is an issue. I just want to stress that we are working against time a little bit here also. So I don't want to be negative, but I think that's how it sounds. Thank you.
No, absolutely. Time is an issue for many species as well, not only in our part of the action and the puzzle. I would like to address a topic on indigenous communities. More and more, of course, we are hearing their need of being involved in the co-management of their own region. This not they don't want to be stakeholders; they want to be involved from the start in the decisions that are taken to preserve the habitat where they live and where they live on. Christine, of course, in Australia, there is a lot of involvement of indigenous community, not only, of course, in the Arctic. We know. What is your view on this aspect?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there is a process by which, well, it is, I know you said, they don't just want to be a stakeholder, they want to be part of it. But so in our environmental regulation process, so there is a place for engagement with anybody with an interest in the environment or operations of what is planned. So at least the projects that I have seen and been involved with, so engagement with indigenous communities has happened, is happening. It is a lot of liaison that needs to be done. It brings me back to what Leila said, it's not just here's the data, we need to interpret things, we need to provide sort of a common understanding, a common language. So there are all sorts of difficulties in engaging with a large variety of stakeholders, I suppose, but I think it is happening. I think we are getting better at it. I think we totally underestimate social and cultural values of our oceans. I think that needs to be coming to play, socio-economic values. It's not just about direct impacts of stressors on the environment. It's on a much more abstract level that we also need to consider and include. And often that is cultural, and that cultural knowledge and value sits with the indigenous communities.
Thank you, Christine. We are hearing a lot of concerns, ideas. And for the last maybe topic of our panel discussion, before we go to the question from the attendees, I would like to ask each of you, where do we go next in terms of being practical? We heard that we are happy with some of the approaches that we made. We need to put some more effort, some more energy, but in practice, what is your view, each of you, from your own perspective, own country, where we should go next, and what should we do? Maybe Peter, you can start. I see you.
Thank you, Michel. Well, I'm still stuck a little bit on the first point. I think we should carefully think about a global alignment somehow. And I use the word framework, and Christina correctly said that maybe it's not the framework we are looking for. It maybe was a wrong word I was using. We have frameworks in different parts, but I think we need something coordinated in the future on a higher level than on member state or European level, that starts to look into all these questions, aligning them and try to share information and try to and there are several reasons for that. I mean, we have some very migratory animals that traverses the oceans. I mean, so we cannot have one kind of framework in the north and another kind of for them in the south. They are the same species. They have a large habitat, so we have to have a broad perspective here when it comes to dealing with all the kind of species. And also, I also foresee that there are going to be very different ways of metrics in the future, which is fine, but we have a little bit to not to diverge too much, because then in the end we will not be able to do a full assessment of the all oceans, which we would like to do. So yes, coming back, I think we need something in the future that aligns the work in the world when it comes to assessing and mitigating in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Tom?
Yeah, where we should go. is, I think, the ability to predict future, which means, we have a big data and already aligned and it can be used also, but it's noise. And they needed to come with the metadata, like what kind of type of the pile, what kind of the kind of hammers and blah, blah, blah. So, and also combining with the kind of map of the each endangered or regularly used species in that area. So now we have big data, but we still cannot predict what's happening in the future. And if we can predict what is going on happening in the future means like 1 month later, or 1 year later, 10 years later, I don't know yet. And if we can predict something, then regulator can use it and to use the data for the adaptive management. So not only for the data alliance, data alignment, but also, as I told you again, is the interpretation and give a solution for the social issues and to predict what will be happening and what should be have a countermeasure in the future. So encouraging a predictable ability is, I think, the next step we're going to seek for. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Lila?
I think I'm gonna just underscore what I said in my last question, because I think that is the space that I see the most need in. The list of solutions is always the shortest. And I think Peter's point about a global framework, or we'll use another word, a global exchange, that might help some of those involved in the technology space to see a broader de-risking. I talked about the need for them to have a commercial space and for investors to see that there is a more universal pressure in some directions if they were to better understand that what the risk they're responding to is moving in some cohesive directions around the world. So that could be an important part of that. I think we're growing that already. But I think it can continue to get stronger. I think the more we can focus on the feedback loops between what people need to know about impacts and what is actually being designed as a solution, and the next question that those solution designers have that is precise about what they need from science. I think increasingly what they need is about how much is enough, how much quieter. Yes, there's some frequency control issues for sure that remain part of the discussion, but the how much questions, which are kind of the heart of where Europe is, I know it's not levels, but even if we move it to habitat, Peter, right? I think that these are the questions that often people are coming back to, and honestly, we're not doing the science in quite that way. We could be asking the question in as many of our tanks and as many of our wild settings as possible, whether 3 decibels is enough. Whether, we could ask that question more and bring that answer forward, and that might be a tighter feedback loop.
Thank you, Lila. Thank you very much. Anna?
I'm gonna say 2 things, if I may. One is so with all of these discussions and negotiations on the plastics treaty, I've been wondering when it's going to be noises time, if we're ever going to be at a place where we discuss a global ocean noise treaty, because I think that would be an interesting direction. But as a more immediate aspect, what I think we also need to make sure going future and kind of as things move is ensuring that we have a good cadre of people who understand all of the different aspects that are encompassed in bioacoustics. I think educating both scientists and future policymakers in the breadth of knowledge that is needed to have good decision making and to provide good data is important. And there's currently very few bioacoustics focused programs in the world, and often there's some schools a little bit here and there, but I think this is one area where, as this need expands and as more and more places realize it's something to be concerned about, that we need to figure out how we can make sure that we have people who are trained to work on these problems.
Yes, this is addressing a very tough question. Where and who and how? Yes. Christine.
Oh, look, where do we go next? I don't really have anything to add to what has been said. I think we are on the right track. It's not one track. I think we're sailing many tracks in parallel that are needs driven, and I think we're doing well on that. There you go.
Okay, well, thank you very much. This is very interesting. We are keeping the agenda, which is good. Thank you, all of you. We received a lot of questions. Stefan and Yela have been putting them together, so we are going to address most of them. So I'm gonna read this question, and please, I will ask the panelists to feel free to jump and answer the question as they come. So there is a general question that says, what are the key challenges and opportunities in establishing effective regulations to mitigate underwater noise pollution? And there are some examples: noise cap in ports as part of the MSFD, noise tax, a mandatory threshold on international level. In terms of the UN High Seas Treaty, what and how will it help to develop regulation? So it's sort of melting pot of many questions, but yes, I guess this question are around the effectiveness of the solution to address the regulation. So noise tax, threshold on international levels. What is your reaction on this question? I have not asked to specific one. I mean, you feel free to raise your hand or just speak without raising your hand. This is going to be a series of questions. I hope we have not yet, for now, addressed them specifically, and we are addressing what the attendees are asking for.
I can try to start, Michel. It's a very good question, a very tough question, I would say, how to deal with this. And there are not very many examples of it has been done. It has been done in Vancouver area with incentives, so to say, and also with harbor fees, and it seems to work there. But there are in the European Union, we are more at the moment listing all the possibilities today that could be used when it comes to shipping, at least. And that is like keeping the ships in shipping lane, speed reductions. When it comes to incentives, we have that they change propellers, that we have also the classification of the ships for the new ships, that they get the lower fees when it comes to harbor if they're classified silent class, as we talk about today. We have IMO rules that they can follow. So there is a broad palette of different things that can be done to reduce the noise, but it has not really been tested fully out yet, because immediately if we come up with this really good idea that we should reduce speed in the middle of North Atlantic, it's not that easily done, because it's not up to the countries to decide. It's an IMO usually decision that comes then. And we haven't really tested that, but even IMO, of course, is very progressive when it comes to, and understandable when it comes to that noise is a pollutant and that has to be dealt with. So I stopped there a little bit describing. This is a kind of a background, and I hope somebody else in the panel can jump in now and maybe be more concrete.
I can try, and if my internet is not behaving, someone will tell me. I think incentives is, I think I mentioned before, kind of a word that sometimes gets too narrowly defined. There are schemes like you talked about in the shipping realm, but that some of the, I like the category of barriers to entry more, because there is a lot of effort to design, an innovation effort to design new ways of doing business offshore. And the question is, can we reduce some of the impediments to those technologies moving forward? You hearing me okay? And can we de-risk that process. So I'm using words I've used before, but I think they're really important. Those are partnerships, and they're partnerships with a chain of people that is not just policymakers and scientists or innovators and scientists. It is banks, it is insurance companies, it is whole investment teams and members of boards. So that private sector, public sector partnership is actually vitally important here. And that group of people will be more invested, truly, in the solutions that are more holistic. So rather than over here in a stovepipe trying to develop a new private-public partnership machine around noise control, we can look to those who are trying to have a greener operational mode into the future and figure out how to continue to bring noise control into that fabric, into the whole, and by doing so, have the conversations about how to de-risk the solutions that are doing this the best. And I think that that is going to be vitally important in the shipping realm. It's hand in hand with greenhouse gas control and efficiency goals that we have, and global market conditions. And we can't do it over here in a little member state window.
Thank you. Anyone who wants to react to this first question, or should we go to the second group of questions maybe? Okay, the second general question is, how can cumulative impacts be assessed and mitigated? And what are the primary effects of the noise pollution on marine ecosystems, and how can these impacts be mitigated? The side questions are, is shipping the biggest contributor? How can we quantify this impact, and how we can assess the impact of shipping on marine life? So this is around shipping, leaving me together other activity. I think have already answered part of this question. We know there are lots of projects dealing with ship noise effect, particularly in the EU. There is a current EU-funded project that is called Saturn, that is dealing with all the different aspects, not only from the acoustic pressure aspect, but also from the particle motion aspect on marine life. So there are a lot of effort put on understanding the effect of shipping. Of course, this is one of the major contributor, but not the only one. Does anyone want to react or to complete this answer?
Well, I can just very quickly start. I think we have had a chicken and egg problem, which is that our rules have been based so much on critically endangered species and what's happening to them next as the driver for whether we do something or not. And therefore, our science has had that singular, short-term, high noise impact. And by that, I mean acute sounds with a high rise time that are injurious and cause dramatic behavioral responses. So we've had this sort of window into our science. So that's not the question. The question is how to do it differently. But the one and part of that is changing some of the changes we're talking about in terms of the pressure that's put on the science. Why are we asking those questions? We're asking them because that's what we're regulating. If indeed we are increasingly asking questions of science that are, how is the sensory environment of the ocean in places that are critically important to animals changing as a result of all the noise sources in this area over time? And how can me, a marine protected area manager, change that the best in the ways that is the most cohesive for this ecosystem? That's a whole different type of science. And so the more cohesively we put that demand on the science from the side of policymaking and regulatory control, the more response and funding we're going to see for that type of science to be done. It is not impossible. It is hard, right? But it will also change our way of thinking, which is that there will be situations when, if I manage the ocean to protect North Atlantic right whales, and there are 300 plus of them left, or southern resident killer whales, and there are 75, right? There will be situations where if I do the right thing for ships to make it better for those animals and how they hear, that I will have helped out a whole lot of locally active fish during their spawning periods in the same northern latitude waters, right? I will have done the same basic thing and helped them out. There will be other situations where I missed it, right? Because I focused so tightly on the 2 months that North Atlantic right whales are there. I slowed all the ships down, and actually all the winter spawning cod are in the winter, right? So the marine protected area manager there could say, I have a more cohesive, more environmentally driven problem. I need the traffic to be quieter more of the time for more of the species. And I need to now have a discussion about how to do that best. Do I truly try to slow everybody down year round in this area? Do I have enough of an emphasis there to have that economic conversation with the people who are using this area? Or do I need to look at some of the seasonality that's still here in the signature and say, over the summer months, I have a lot of whale watching boats and a lot of humpback whales. I need to work with that sector to drive their boats differently. They need to plug in overnight, because if I have a diesel electric engine, I have a quieter component for that sector, and it matters, right? In other places, those questions will all look different. But we need to start to think about them in a way that allows us to ask the right questions of science and start to provide the pressure for what are the questions that drive that more holistic way of managing.
Thank you, Lila. There was another block that absolutely deals with what you were saying, which is in terms of the measurement and how we monitor. But I see that Anna has raised her hand.
Yeah, in terms of the question of cumulative impact, I think that we're also, I'm going to put a plug again here for long-term monitoring data sets, and the fact that they can be used for more than just long-term monitoring, but that opportunistically, in right places at the right times, they could provide information on things like cumulative impacts. When there's various natural experiments where certain signals go away for a while, that at least through an observational kind of framework, we can start to get some sense of, is it or how big of an issue something is, even if we don't have, the perfect answer. Those kinds of data sets that are now existing in more and more places over longer periods of time, if put together in a smart way to explore places and times when there's concerns about cumulative impacts, I think they could help us kind of get started with that question in a framework that is very different from an experiment that you would normally set up for impact studies, but in lack of any other information, I think can be quite valuable.
Thank you, Anna. Continuing with the group of questions. So in terms of the measurement and the way we get metrics, the question is, what advancements in technology and methods are available for monitoring and measuring underwater noise level effectively? What methods for monitoring? Can we use satellite observation, computing power for predictions, global network of sensors? This is the bunch of questions that come around the metrics to measure and to monitor underwater noise. I was going to ask the first question to you, Anna, if you want to complete what you just said, and then we can see if there is any other panelists who want to complete.
Yeah, I think as it's been addressed also by other panelists, that we're really starting to do a really nice job of collecting a lot of data and putting it together in kind of shareable ways, both in terms of code, so analysis tools. I mean, there's all kinds of programs that will calculate your source level. The tricky part still in all of this is making sure that you have calibrated sensors, so that if you are interested in ultimately noise levels, that's what you can get out of your sensors. I think that is probably the main concern in this regard still. The question about satellite monitoring, I guess I saw that earlier, I was puzzled by that because I don't fully understand if that's meant as in using AIS satellite monitoring of ships to combine. I think that would be interesting in some sort of modeling and predictive ways of thinking about how well can we maybe predict noise levels, as there was talk about the future and the ability to predict what we can expect from Tom. I think that's where that could be most useful. But in general, I think that there's a lot of tools available. They're maybe not all compiled in a single place and easy to access. It requires some knowledge of where to look and who to talk to. But I think there's quite a bit that's made life a lot easier for us now than it was 10 or 15 years ago.
Thank you, Anna. Christine, I was about to ask you, and you raised your hand.
I thought you might. All right, cool. I think all the examples, the person mentioned, whoever raised the questions, yeah, I mean, we're getting smarter with technology. There's always new technologies coming up. So I think it's a very rapid process. It's more remote, it's more real time, it's less invasive. I think the issue that we are raising is how to handle all that data. So coming back to distributed acoustic sensing using fiber optic cables, you're going to collect terabytes every single day. So if you want to monitor just one season or a whole year in just one area, I mean, how do you store all that data? So then you need to look at real-time processing, because you can't possibly store the raw data. You have to store pre-processed data. So I think the data science to me is that that race that we need to tackle right now. The technology to collect immense amounts of data, as I said, remotely, non-invasively, real time, is there, and it's still getting better, but we're losing that race of what to do with all that data.
Thank you, Christine. Peter.
I try to be short. I will just want to emphasize that we have a serious gap when it comes to monitoring. That is near coast. In Europe, most of the noise is produced by small leisure crafts near coast, and it's actually much more than the shipping is doing, because ships are usually further away. And I think here satellite can play an important role, both taking like ordinary pictures, but also maybe in the future radar that can go through clouds. So I think this is something that we have to be better at, and we have to look into much more. And and the reason, I mean, is that the near coast environment where it's shallow, this is very often we have the high biodiversity, and we don't look at that at the moment. We are looking at big ships offshore, where usually not much is going on. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, not much is going on. At least we don't see it. Yes, Tom.
Yeah. Well, let me make sure. Now we have a lot of platform in the ocean, offshore wind farm, or like AUV, and also the deep water, the mining. And so please let us share that platform, not only for the data mining, but also the sensing as well, including noise. So that will be encouraging kind of data, and not only for the data amount of data, but also location and the depth of the data. So the sharing the platform may be one of the solutions.
Thank you very much, Tom. We have 10 minutes left before we end the discussion and the event. I will have to give you a couple of minutes, each of you, to sort of wrap up, but maybe with one question that maybe focuses a little bit what you will say. In 2 years' time, we will have again an edition of Ocean Noise. So this is just to put one deadline, or at least one date where we are going to meet again and deal with all the different issues that we spoke of during the meeting. What will be your, Peter said, wish list? What would you like to see in these 2 years us discussing or bringing to the conference in terms of this underwater noise issue, the policies, the industries? Where do you want us to be in 2 years' time? I will start maybe with Lila, because again, I can see her on the left screen, and then I will continue. Thank you.
I think in 2 years' time, my wish would be that we have, thinking on my feet fast. Okay, my wish in 2 years' time, as somebody who is very interested and engaged in the IMO's process, is at that time we will be at the end of the experience building phase for the newest iteration of the underwater noise guidelines for commercial shipping. And as a global community, we'll be considering what we learned and considering next steps. And I'll just use that as a sort of time frame that has a lot of flavors of other conversations that are non-shipping related around noise control around the world that I think could move in 2 years in a similar way, right? So I am hopeful that the fabric of that UN-based conversation and its associated work under what's called the GLOW Noise Project, which is specifically trying to work on the capacity development side of that work in developing countries around the world, that the fabric of those two things together, both of which need to culminate in 2 years in a new decision space, if not the decision space, right? They will have helped us see where we are with delivering common risk assessment frameworks to a variety of users around the world who do not need to reinvent the wheel, that a lot of us have already worked on and that is available for them to now iterate on. Will have moved the needle significantly on predicting, as Tom talked about, scenarios for noise control under future paradigms of shipping traffic, and creating, again, a framework for how you do that doesn't need to be reinvented by each entity around the world, but is in common and can be shared transparently. And I am hoping in parallel and not associated with the IMO, we will have put pressure on everyone around the world to do the type of science that affects a more global decision service for a larger suite of species affected more cumulatively and chronically by noise, so that we can start to have that tight feedback loop with developers and innovators about what are the types of changes that are most holistic in terms of how you operate offshore, that have the lowest possible noise control, but also are responsive to other environmental needs. So that's where I hope we can move the needle.
Thank you, Lila. Peter?
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you also, Lila, taking a little bit time so I can think a little bit on the question. So I have a kind of short wish list here and a little bit of pragmatic. I would wish that in the few coming years around the world, there are sub-renal tests of different kinds of mitigations that we can see. How does it really work out? When I say tests of mitigation, I think about tests where you have science, policy, and stakeholders involved together. And it could be that we pinpoint some part in the world that we're going to make slowdown of ships here, we're going to make convoying, we're going to have harbor fees that's already taking place, but we can have other kind of incentives just to work together, and also to look at identify challenges, even problems that we have to overcome and overbridge. I think that would be really wonderful if we could go that way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Anna, please.
Yeah, I guess my list would include starting to think more about impacts from an ecosystem level and moving away from individual species. Because from my understanding, even the EU framework that is focusing on habitat is still looking at that habitat on a species level. But what noise is doing is impacting all the species in the environment together at the same time. And interactions among those species are going to be also important to know. So yeah, thinking of it from an ecosystem perspective, and also, as I mentioned earlier, I think moving as it started to happen, I think more towards chronic, long-term, lower level noise and the impacts of that. is another thing that we need to get a better handle of. So hope to see more of that.
Thank you, Anna. Christine?
Yes, you should have emailed those questions beforehand, Michelle. But at least you're not asking where we want to be in 20 years. At least you're only asking where we want to be in 2 years. So I think it's exciting. I think even 2 years are exciting. I'm thinking about all the technological development, whether it's, you know, subsea processing or all of the creative things that people are thinking about for whatever, subsea mining or so. I'm thinking it'll be exciting to see what new challenges there are. We will be better at having frameworks and information to deal with novel stuff where nobody has ever recorded these things. We're working off blueprints. We don't know, you know, what even the noise and vibration coming out of these things is. So I think we'll be working more hands in hand with policy, with biologists, with engineers to tackle this. And I think it's exciting. You should have given me more time, Michelle.
It's a great answer, Christine. Perfect. Thank you very much. Tom, you have the last word.
Yeah, thank you. 2 years, that's a great constraint. And in 2025, in the middle of the United States nation ocean decade, right? It started 2021. So I think it is a good timing to review and to issue some kind of policy brief for like countermeasures and for the potential future countermeasures for each government, each international body. So, you know, we means the scientists already noticed that this issue is existing, and the people do not aware yet. Well, so this is something a good timing to unite and to meet each other and discuss each other and to make some kind of relatively short policy brief with multiple languages and in the middle of the ocean decade and to issue that to the UN and also the each government. That might be a practical solution to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. We have 1 minute left to thank you all for your time, for bringing your expertise, experience, joy, and hope to this very challenging issue of underwater noise and all these effects. I am personally, as you all shared, hopeful that we are on the right track. As Anna was saying, there were more and more young scientists involved in this issue, bringing their fresh view, with fresh data. When we started many years ago, we didn't have access to all this data. So it's very good to see that all the young scientists are bringing their view. And I invite you, all of you, to join us in 2 years' time, so to see if all the ideas that we had are going to take place. And to end, I want to again thank Jela and Stefan for the all the work that they've done, and all the attendees. Thank you for being part of this adventure, and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.